So last time we talked about unsecured short-term borrowing, and now we're going to talk about secured, which should be lower cost.
Secured.
Yeah, in theory, secured should be. We're going to see that that might not actually be true. Let's start with accounts receivable funding. By the way, accounts receivable are an asset, and as an asset, you can use it as collateral to borrow money. And so that's why, what's what we call assigning receivables. And so the bank loans me money. In exchange, I assign the receivables that I am receiving from a certain, let's say a certain customer, maybe my biggest customer. And so I pledge all those receivables as collateral for the loan. Now, the bank is not taking on the risk of non-payment. By the way, there is the risk that your customers won't pay you, right? That's default risk. And so the bank here is not taking on responsibility for that. That responsibility still lays with the company that has the receivables. So if I am taking risk away from the bank, what should that do to my cost of borrowing? Yeah, it should lower it, right? And so assigning receivables should be less risky than the next thing we're going to talk about, and therefore have a lower cost. The next thing is called factoring receivables. And factoring is where you sell your receivables to someone else. And in conventional factoring, the person who buys your receivables is taking, in fact in both of these, they're taking on the risk of non-collection. What's that going to do to the cost of such financing? It's got to drive it up. And so there are two things that are going to make borrowing money here expensive. Number one is the time value of money. Of course, even if there were no default risk whatsoever, they are not going to be willing to loan you the entire amount, right? They're going to buy your receivables at a discount. And so what you end up with is you can choose to sell your receivables at a discount, or you can wait and collect the full amount. And you need to figure out which of those is better for your business. Oh my goodness. First of all, you're late.
Yeah, I know.
Secondly, oh my goodness. Did you guys see, now, are you still in the University of Coral, whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys see where they're going to spend $250,000 of your tuition fees to send the choir to South America?
Oh, we're coming.
What do they need?
They're building them a palace over there too?
Yeah, that's what I want to know. And somehow this, yeah, never mind. Okay. You're graduating, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to get to go?
No.
No.
How big
Okay.
is the choir?
I have no idea. I have no idea how many people they're sending.
It's a good number of people.
I do know this. They're not sending the Financial Management Association Club down to South America. Back to the story. Okay, so we know there's going to be this time value of money discount, and there's also the default potential discount. And so factoring, you're going to get far less. You're going to get less than the amount of the face amount of your receivables. Now, conventional factoring has both of those risks. Maturity factoring kind of tempers the time value issue because they're not going to give you the money until a later date. They're not going to give you that money until a later date. So, which do you think would have a greater discount, the conventional factoring or the maturity factoring? Conventional factoring, you get the money today. Conventional's got to have the greater discount, right? Because with maturity factoring, you're getting rid of part of that whole time value of money issue. Okay, now the biggest industry for factoring is the apparel business. And the reason that it is because of the way that stores have to get their inventory ahead of time to be in place for the season and all that sort of stuff. So that's why they are the biggest users. Now let's talk about credit card receivable funding. And we also call this a business cash advance. So think about the way credit cards work. When you charge, when you pay for something with your credit card, the people on the other end, they're going to get that money in 2 to 3 days. But what if they need money sooner than that? Well, they can pledge their future credit card receivables for loan money now. And so the way that would work is you would have a set amount that you're going to owe, and they would take that out of your credit card receivables. Now, who's going to offer that? How about the bank where you do your credit card transactions? Because they managed to get their hands on the money before you. And so that actually lowers the default risk quite a bit on this loan that you're taking out from them. So let's say I'm getting in $100,000 a month for credit card receivables. I need to borrow $70,000. I can go ahead and do that, and then next month, instead of paying me the $100,000, they're going to pay me whatever my receivables are minus that $70,000 if the loan's for 30 days. It's actually a little more expensive than you might think, and so it's one of those things that you need to look at all of these options and determine what's your best, your lowest rate on these. Now, let's talk about another company that is interested in doing, say, credit card receivable funding. How about Amazon? If you've got an Amazon store and they're getting regular payments for you, do you think they might be willing to loan you money to go out and especially to buy inventory that you send to Amazon? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's credit card receivable funding. And then we have inventory loans. And the first one is called the blanket inventory lien. What do you think the blanket inventory lien would be?
Has like overall inventory that at the current moment.
Yeah, so they have a lien against your entire inventory. Now, that sounds pretty good, especially if you have a pretty big inventory and a not fluctuating inventory, right? Because if it's big variable, maybe this month they've got 100,000, next month they're only going to have 30,000. If I loan them $50,000, I might not get paid back if they default in the month with the low inventory. So here's what you need to know about blanket inventory liens, though. Do you trust the people to just tell you what their inventory is? No. So what do? You send an auditor out periodically, randomly, to check. And there was actually a electronics store based out of New Jersey, and they had their blanket inventory lien, and they had this is a true story, by the way. There was an old guy that was coming to do the audits. And he would come along and he would see this big wall of TVs. And then he would walk around and look, and sure enough, he saw all these TVs, and he's like, he does the math, right? Because you can figure out how many TVs there are just by counting, multiplying together. And he says that's how many TVs they have. Well, it turns out that basically what these people had done was build a hollowed out inventory of televisions. And so the inventory wasn't nearly as great as they thought. The security of the loan wasn't therefore nearly as great. And they wouldn't have ever found out except for two things. Number one, the old guy retired. And the new person is about your age and they're physically fit. And they show up, and the warehouse manager takes the auditor on the same trip that they always took the old guy on, and then asks if he was satisfied. And he says, well, why don't you get me that step ladder over there, and I want to, step up on the ladder and take a look around. Do you think someone starts to get nervous? Oh, yeah. And so he climbed up, and he realized what they had been doing. And he rats them out to their creditors, not rats them out, it's actually a very positive thing that he does. He tells the creditors that this person is not holding the appropriate amount of inventory. Long story short, the chain ends up going bankrupt. And of course, the people who had the blanket inventory lien don't end up being able to retrieve as much value because the inventory that was supposedly securing the loan wasn't even there. Are people scumbags? Yeah, people are scumbags. So, what's the moral to this story? If you're doing these kinds of audits, check for these sorts of things. The hollowed out inventory. Heck, they might even just have empty TV boxes. It might not hurt to grab a couple of TVs and at least heft the box to make sure that they're actually in there. Next we have trust receipts. And trust receipts are used to put inventory on car dealer lots and inside appliance stores. Now the trust receipt is specifically aimed at an individual vehicle and so or appliance. And so it's going to have the serial number on it and it's going to give you the amount that they owe on that. And so when they sell whatever the item is, whether it's a car or appliance, what do you think the expectation is? You loan money to someone, and the car is the security. They sell the car. What do you expect them to do? Yeah, pay off the loan. And so that's the way trust receipts work. And you'll notice this, by the way, it's not cheap financing. You'll notice this as a car sits on the lot longer, what happens? Do they start doing to the price? Yeah, they start dropping the price. And it's because they're balancing off the loss in profit versus the cost of continuing to pay interest on these trust receipts. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes you'll hear this called floor plan financing, and especially at furniture stores and appliance stores because it's putting out the stuff on the sales floor is what it's for. And then we have field warehouse financing. And field warehouse financing avoids the problem of the blanket inventory lien because it puts the inventory outside the control of the company. So, if, for example, you guys know Dana Frederick, he works here, he's a management guy. He has an Amazon store, and he has pallets of inventory at Amazon. He can't get to them, so he couldn't fake up this whole situation we were talking about with the hollowed out boxes. And that's similar to the idea of the field warehouse financing. It's a third-party warehouse. It's not the lenders, it's not the borrowers, it's a third party, and basically they are controlling the inventory. Therefore, it kind of eliminates the scumbaggery that people might be tempted to do if they had a blanket inventory lien. And so, what do you think the interest rate on field warehouse financing would look like compared to blanket inventory lien? What's the risk like? Yeah, the risk is less. And so the interest rate's going to be lower, but there's an added cost because now we're paying a third party to manage this inventory. Does that make sense? And so you're going to have to balance those two things out. Amazon's, getting back to Amazon, Amazon actually does offer a similar kind of thing where you can borrow money against the inventory you currently have on location at Amazon. And that would be even less risky than field warehouse financing because it's not a third party that's holding the inventory, it's the lender, right? Does that make sense? And so in theory, that should be a cheaper way to borrow because the risk is less. There's a Wall Street Journal article when they first started offering that kind of financing, and there's this old guy that's selling on Amazon, and he says, they've already got their nose up my business on this credit cards receivable type financing. He says, I don't want to give them that much control, that he would also use the inventory financing. But if you're all in with Amazon, you could get all sorts of financing from them. Questions? Okay. So let's talk about some other short-term funding sources. First of all, commercial paper. Yeah, you can think of commercial paper like being a zero coupon bond that is for, the maturity is 270 days or less. Now, this is a weird thing. Why would we pick such an odd amount of time? By the way, how many months is 270 days? 9 months. So this is about the amount of time that it takes to make a baby. That's how long these are. These debt instruments are going to be outstanding. They get zero coupons. So what does that mean they have to sell at? Yeah, they got to sell at a discount. Okay, so this commercial paper basically is unsecured short-term borrowing, and this commercial paper is traded out there in the market. Now, in order to play in the commercial paper market, you have to be a well-known entity with very strong credit, because these commercial paper, if you've ever heard of money market funds are invested in them. They're very focused on not what they would call breaking the buck, which means they're actually all about preservation of the principal, and then they're going to get you a little interest on top of it. Long story short, if you've got great credit and you're a known player, you can do commercial paper and you can have a lower cost of borrowing as a result. So this is a nice option if you have it available to you, but most companies likely do not. By the way, also, commercial paper was a big thing before the financial crisis. What do you figure happened to the commercial paper market during the financial crisis? It just dried straight up. By the way, if you guys don't remember, everyone was scared crapless, right? Everyone was scared. Even the best names that you thought would be around forever, you didn't know if they were going to be around tomorrow. So everyone was scared. People aren't really interested in loaning money out, especially to corporations. And so what instead, they're piling into treasuries and things like that. So as a result, the commercial credit market or commercial paper market dried up. What do you think that did to people's ability to refinance the commercial paper when their 270 days were up? If no one is willing to loan you the new money, even if you are a healthy, profitable business, what could happen? Yeah, you could be bankrupt. And so we talked earlier, I think, about trying to match the duration of a loan to kind of the life of the asset. If you were trying to fund long-term assets with commercial paper, you could find yourself in a world of hurt doing that, so I wouldn't recommend it. Also important to keep a cushion of cash on hand, which some of you learned during the business strategy game. And sometimes it's because the commercial paper market might just seize up on you through no fault of your own. Now, let's get back to that 270 days. Why do you think such an odd amount? What do you think's driving that? Just guess. Say again?
Reports come out certain times,
Okay, you're getting close. Who do we have to report to? Everything we do at the corporation, basically. Shareholders and, yeah, the government. And it turns out that the SEC requires you to register any securities with a maturity greater than 270 days. And so people will go out and borrow money for 270 days. It doesn't have to be registered with the government. It lowers our cost of reporting. It lowers our, basically it makes it a whole lot easier to do this. It's a whole lot cheaper to issue this debt that you don't have to register with the government. And by the way, if you've ever been to the DMV to get a new title on a car, you know that dealing with the government isn't always easy. And if I can get around dealing with them, I would prefer to. And so that's why we see 270 days. Questions? Okay, the other is trade credit. And we talked a bit about this when we were talking about the cash cycle. What is trade credit? if I were looking on my balance sheet as a borrower, which account would I call my trade credit?
Accounts payable.
Yeah, it's accounts payable. And so what can I do to, by the way, what's the interest rate on that as long as I'm paying within the terms? 0. And well, I love to have 0 interest loans. And so what I want to do is maximize my use of that trade credit by waiting until the end of the terms to pay my bills. Now, we talked a bit about that, the flip side of it when we're talking about managing receivables. We definitely, though, we want to take as long to pay our bills as is ethical. Do some people blow past that? Yeah, remember I told you about Walmart? And are there some people who are shortchanging themselves on this? Yeah, I told you a Fortune 500 company that I know of that they get the bill and they just immediately pay it. Undoubtedly, they're passing up 28 days worth of trade credit there. So they could do better. By the way, why do you think that the people making those decisions don't care? Whose money is it?
Corporations.
And who owns the corporation? Shareholders. It's the shareholders' money. So remember I told you the story that back when it was just 5 employees and those guys were the owners. They cared very deeply about such things. But now, right? Because the people, it's just an inconvenience to try to remember to wait 28 days to pay this bill. Okay, so pay our bills slower to build up additional trade credit, but of course we're going to do it in an ethical manner. Questions? By the way, if you buy something from someone and the terms are there when you make the purchase, you have agreed to abide by those terms. And so to do otherwise would be a breach of the contract, and that's unethical, right? Because the law is the base.
Could people argue that you're screwing up other businesses kind of by helping out shareholder equity temporarily?
Okay, so keep in mind that the person who loaned us this money, the supplier, has agreed to give us 30 days to pay, right? And keep in mind the goal of financial management is to maximize shareholder wealth. And it's not a short-term thing. Because if I'm saving 28 days worth of interest every month by using the trade credit instead of borrowing from the bank, I'm continuously improving shareholder wealth. Now, if I go beyond the terms, then that's unethical, right? And I wouldn't advise that. By the way, I think this is the first time I've ever seen you without a hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even recognize you when you're standing over here. Okay. Questions? I thought maybe you were bald. You're not.
No, I just don't want to do my hair in the morning.
Ah, okay. You must have a lunch date. Questions? Okay, that's the end of that. Now we are on to credit and credit policy. So what's credit? It's when we send products to a customer and we don't receive cash, but we tell them instead that they need to pay us at some point in the future. We are extending them credit. In essence, we are loaning them money for 30 days or 60 days, however long we tell them, in order that they can afford to buy our product. So, let's start with the fundamental question. Why offer credit? Let's ask this question. Would you prefer not to offer credit? Oh yeah, absolutely. Because this is money that you could have had sooner if they had paid cash. Also, if they pay cash up front, what kind of risk does it avoid? Well, the default risk, right? The risk that they don't pay. And it also helps your liquidity, right? Okay, so there's all sorts of reasons we would prefer to have cash now. And so the question then becomes, why do we offer credit? If we're in a situation where none of the other competitors offer credit, do you think we should? No, we shouldn't. But what if you were in a market where no one offered credit and you decided to offer credit then? What do you think would happen to your sales versus your competitors? Yeah, it's going to shoot up. And so you're having to weigh the cost of credit versus this benefit. But here's the problem. Are you guys familiar with game theory at all? Do you know about the prisoner's dilemma? So the prisoner's dilemma is this. Mr. Stiff and Mr. Crawford are involved in a bank robbery. We suspect it was them, but we don't know for sure. They were both wearing ski masks and some other stuff. Bless you. So here's what I do as a cop. I get them in 2 separate interview rooms, and I both make them this same offer. I say, whoever confesses first only gets 5 years in jail, the other person gets 10 years in jail. Now here's what I know. I know that, and they do too, they both know that if nobody confesses, how many years are they getting? 0, right? Now, what do you think the solution is for these 2 guys? Keep in mind, they're not in the same room. The best solution is not to say anything, and that would be what we call cooperating, right? And so the prisoner dilemma in game theory is all about cooperating versus competing. But here's what you need to know. You remember I told you I have a friend that did 7 years in federal prison? He said that a lot of the people he was in prison with were there because they were ratted out by their best friend, their brother, their sister, their kids, or their mom. Isn't that low to be ratted out by your mom? Why do you think these people ratted out their very close and trusted family members? Protect themselves. They were getting a shorter sentence, maybe no jail time at all, in exchange for their testimony. Now that you know how that there's basically no honor among these people, you guys, you're not even relation, right? So, you're just good friends. Are you really trust this guy with an extra 5 years of your life?
I'm snitching first.
He's already doing it, right?
10 years on that pay taxes.
Yeah, you're earning like 17 and a half cents an hour to wash filthy inmate underwear.
I'm gonna read so many books.
I obviously need to bring my friend in to talk to you about the realities of, he did read a boatload, mostly Louis L'Amour. Back to the story, old cowboy books. Back to the story. How does that relate to this thing? If I offer credit, what do my competitors immediately have to do? They've got to offer credit too. Now, what happens to the sales? They go back to where they were before. Have I gained anything by offering credit? No. But now, the entire industry, we all have higher costs because now we all have to offer credit. Does that make sense? And so in that case, you're better off cooperating and not offering credit than competing. Think about the market for marijuana. Roll back in time before they legalized it in Missouri. Do you think you could buy marijuana on credit? No. Now, can you buy marijuana on credit? Can you use a credit card? I've been in one of those places just to look around. Yeah. Can you? He says, so can you imagine the guy in this suit would know about buying marijuana? Okay.
It's great.
It is. Okay. So what's the point here? What do you think that's done? I would be interested to know. Now, I don't personally know any dope dealers, but if I had to guess, maybe in the black market, they're having to be a little more easy on the whole credit thing. I don't know. Questions? Actually, if you roll back to the 1980s, one of my favorite hip hop artists, a man named Tone Loc, he actually recorded a song, and one of the things he says, I can pay cash or I can buy it on time. The name of the song was Chiba Chiba. Look it up. Okay, back to the story. So that's the only reason we offer credit is because it's a competitive thing, and if our competitors aren't doing it, we shouldn't do it either. So now let's talk about credit policy. So here we have the terms of the sale. The example here is 210 net 30. Let's walk through each one of these things. That 2 is a 2% discount. The 2 is a 2% discount. The 10 is the discount period. If I pay within the first 10 days, I can get a 2% discount. If I'm going to take the discount, what day should I pay on? Yeah, day 10, right? We're going to push this out as far as we can. It's ethical. Okay, now if I choose not to pay the discount, then, or not to take the discount, then I have to pay them on what day? Day 30. Day 30. Okay, so the credit period is the amount of time that we've got, so that's going to be 30. And we've talked about the discounts, and of course the terms might simply be cash. I had a buddy who his dad did automotive work. He had a shop in his backyard, and he had a big sign that said, "In God we trust, all others must pay cash." Those were his terms, right? They're right there on the shop wall. So let's talk about credit standards. Is every possible customer equally attractive as a borrower? No. You could have some that are in really good financial shape, and you could have some that are in poor financial shape. You could also have ones that were in good financial shape but just were lousy at paying their bills. So you gave us an example of a local business that is lousy at paying their bills. They're financially strong, but if I'm going to look at their payment history, I might consider that when I am putting together these credit standards. So not only do I want to look at their financial situation, I want to look at their payment history. And how do I get payment history for these people? It's something called Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet. You can have a subscription to this, and having the subscription gives you information about other people's payment history, but it also makes you responsible for reporting on how your customers pay you. That's how this data gets built up, because there's no public record of these things. Our credit analysis is all about determining the probability that the customer will repay. And once again, we're going to look at financial strength, and we're going to look at their prior history. One of the things that I experienced when I was it's actually in my last job when I was a salesman, I had been given the target of the world's largest blow molder as my customer. And it's my very first sales job ever. And I asked them why they would trust me with the account for the world's largest blow molder. And they told me, "We pissed those people off 20 years ago, and they haven't done business with us since. You have nothing to lose." Right? That's why they were willing to throw me at this. They thought, hey, we might get lucky. So, what do? I go in there and I find a problem that I can solve with our product, and begrudgingly they agree to give us a shot. And so I get this order. And then I have to go to my credit manager. And the credit manager is going to make the decision on how much credit we can extend these people. And it was so weird. We sold stuff and it went all the way from $2 a pound up to say $500 a pound, but the way we did credit was always in pounds. And so we'd say, yeah, you can give them 500 pounds, right? And so the amount of money even varied based on the price of the product. And so they told me, oh yeah, you can do 500 pounds. And I said, look, that's nuts. These people, that's going to be like less than 1 day's worth of production for them. We have to do better. And so I ended up arm wrestling, and he was even weaker than me. I ended up winning against the credit manager because he was going to basically kill us off with that potential customer. By the way, credit manager. Do you think credit managers tend to be overly generous with credit or overly tight? Yeah, they tend to be overly tight, and it's because who gets smacked in the nose if the customer defaults? The credit manager, right? Okay, so that's the credit analysis, and he looked at their credit and came up with the idea of 500 pounds, and we had a big argument about it. And then we have our collection policy. This is after we've already shipped them the stuff and they owe us the money. First of all, we should be monitoring our receivables. Monitoring receivables means making sure that people are paying on time. And this gets back to what we talked about with the guy who would have the checks in his desk drawer. Only the one guy was actively monitoring the receivables. Everybody else was giving them lots of time and not obtaining payment. By the way, when we have past due accounts, you want to reach out to them and let them know personally by phone that they need to pay. Eventually, though, what might you do with past due accounts?
Send them to collections.
Yeah, you send them to collections. Now, this sounds like an easy solution, right? You send them to collections. But how much are people going to be willing to pay me for my overdue receivables? Pennies on the dollar, right? And so people will buy this for, say, 10, 12 cents on the dollar, and then they will turn around and squeeze these people like trying to get blood out of a turnip until they cough up some money in hopes of making a profit. So turning stuff over to collections is not going to be one of your first courses of action. You'd always rather collect these things on your own. And we talk about the toughness or laxity in our attempts to collect overdue. So I had a buddy whose dad owned a fuels distributorship. And so basically all these little independent gas stations we used to have, he would go around and sell gasoline to these people. And then when he would go around to collect, he would always get these sob stories. Oh, the baby needs a new pair of shoes, mama needs a new this, that. And he was sympathetic to them. And then he would come home and his wife would ask him about how the collections for the day went. And he would tell her. Now here's what you need to know about mom. She's got 6 boys to feed. I don't know if you've ever, well, some of you have been teenage boys, right? You remember how much you ate. So she's trying to feed 6 boys, and here he is being very forgiving to these people for not paying their bills on time. What do you think mom started doing? Yeah, mom starts doing the collections on her own. Do you think mom took any crap or excuses? No, mom's like, I'm just going to stay here until you pay. And it was interesting, after that point in their relationship, she was always in charge of collections. They reduced the laxity in their collection efforts. Okay, now, the executive committee creates the credit policy. So let's talk about the executive committee. We're going to have the CEO, the CFO involved, and the people in charge of sales. We're going to have all these people in charge together in this, and in addition to the credit manager. Now, in the meeting, the credit manager is going to plead for what? Strict credit terms, right? Because they don't want to have to be responsible for these defaults. What are the salespeople going to argue for? Yeah, lax terms, because how do salespeople get paid? Commissions. And do the salespeople really care if the people later default? No, unless you've got it set up to where the salesperson doesn't get paid until the company gets paid. And this goes right back to people are scumbags, right? And so salespeople are always going to argue for laxer credit terms. The credit manager is going to argue for tighter credit terms. That's why you have to have basically the entire executive committee together to do this, because you've got to, and in fact, it really boils down to the CEO. What's the CEO's job? I'll give you a hint. Maximize shareholder wealth. The CEO has to weigh these concerns off against each other and come up with the optimal that is going to maximize shareholder wealth. So we don't just have our credit manager coming up with the policy, but the credit manager does administer the policy. So here we have our terms of sale. We're going to do an example here. The basic form says 210 net 45. Can someone tell me what the percent discount is?
2.
2. How many days how many days do you have to pay and receive the discount? 10. And then if you don't pay it at day 10, when are you going to pay it? Day 45. So how many days actually between the end of the discount period and when you have to pay? Yeah, 35 days. So let's ask this question. If we buy $500 worth of merchandise with the credit terms that are given above, how much do you actually pay if you pay within the first 10 days? I would tell you on day 10. Well, it's just a matter of taking 100% minus 2%, that's 0.98, multiplied by 500 gives us 490 if you pay in that 10 days. But if you pay in 45 days, then you are going to be paying 500. And so now that we have this whole discount and higher amount relationship and time in there, we can figure out what is the interest rate that is associated with not taking this discount. So what we're going to do is figure out what is the implied annual effective rate when customers don't take the discount, and we're going to use the terms that have been given in this example. So basically, what we are doing is paying $2 to borrow 98. How do I get there? Well, keep in mind, so let's assume it's a $100 order. If I pay within the first 10 days, how much do I owe? 98 bucks. But if I wait the whole 45 days, I owe 100. So basically, I'm borrowing this 98 for 35 days. And how much interest am I paying for the privilege? Yeah, $2. So you might be tempted here to think that that's 2 divided by 98 tells us that our annual rate. But what's the problem with thinking this is an annual rate? How long are we borrowing the money for? 35 days. And so we know that there's going to be more than one of these periods per year. We're going to have compounding, so we need to figure that all out. So you could use the formula that I've got up here, or we could do this on our calculator and make our lives a lot easier. First of all, I'm going to figure out how, let's see, the period rate. I'm going to say 2 divided by 98 equals, and because my calculator deals with interest rates, not decimals, I'm going to say times 100 equals, and I'm going to say store 1. That's my period rate. And then I need to figure out how many of these periods there are per year. How would I figure out how many 35-day periods there are in a year?
365 over 35.
Yeah, 365 divide by 35. I'm getting 10.4286, just like they say here, and I'm going to store that in location 2. Okay, now I am going to, instead of doing it this way, I am going to use second and number 2. What does number 2 say above it? ICONV. That is for interest conversion. So nominal is the same as an APR, same as stated or quoted interest rate. That's what we're going to put in here. How would I calculate the APR for this loan?
Periods times the rate.
Yeah, it's the number of periods times the rate. So I'm going to say recall 1 times recall 2 equals. There is my APR. And I'm going to hit the enter key. By the way, does APR take compounding into account? No. Okay, now I'm going to arrow up. What do you think C per Y stands for?
Compounding per year.
Yeah, it's compoundings per year. And remember, I already had the number of periods stored in location number 2. I'm going to hit enter. By the way, if I don't hit enter, it's like it never even happened. The calculator just forgets it. And then finally, I'm going to arrow up, and here it says EFF. What do you think EFF stands for? Yeah, it's the effective annual rate, and the effective annual rate accounts for compounding. And so now it tells me that I can either compute or I can enter. What do you think we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to compute that. And when we do, we get that our effective rate is 23.45%. Even with interest rates where they are today, if you are the person selling these items, if you are the person extending the credit, do you want these people to take the discount or wait the whole time? Yeah, if they wait the whole time, they're paying 23.45%. Undoubtedly, right now, you can go out and borrow money for less than that. And so you are making more money off of your customers not taking the discount than you are spending on borrowing that money from the bank. Does that make sense? Okay, now, look at this from not the supplier standpoint, but from the customer standpoint. When would the customer think it was good to forego the discount? What kind of customer is going to forego the discount? Bad customers, and not morally bad people, but just people who can't borrow money anywhere else at less than 23.45%. Does that make sense? And so if you were otherwise going to have to fund your company with payday loans or with credit card debt that you weren't going to immediately pay off at the end of the period, this might be a good deal for you. But if you are a business that has access to borrowing in other ways that are going to cost you less than 20%, you should definitely take the discount. Does that make sense? Now, do you think the decision might change based on the terms offered? If I'm only offering a 1% discount, what's that going to do to the effective annual rate there? Let's find out. So basically, we would be down here, we would have 1, let's see, what's 1 divided by 99? There we go. And I'm going to multiply that by 100 because we know the calculator thinks in percentages. And then I'm going to store that as location 1. And now I can go through this whole thing again. The nominal will be recall 1 times recall 2 equals enter. Arrow up. And that's going to stay the same. And then we're going to compute. The effective rate is much lower there. And it makes sense. They're only paying $1 to borrow for that 35 days as opposed to paying $2 for that 35 days. Does that make sense?
If a company wanted to increase its operating leverage, couldn't it take out multiple lines of credit and just create a cycle with it where they pay it off one by one?
Okay.
Is that not possible?
So taking out multiple lines of credit, are you talking about truly lines of credit or are you talking about just borrowing like bank loans? So a line of credit has a very specific meaning, remember from last time? But, so what you're asking is, couldn't you just go around and borrow from one person to pay off the other?
Yeah, so say if you have like 5 different credit cards and they all have $100, but you get like 1% cash back on each one.
Ah,
You go,
okay. Yeah, so you could do that. The question is this, what's it going to do to your credit rating?
Wouldn't that increase it because you're making payments on time and you're opening more cards? That shows your responsibility. Because wouldn't it be like a glitch? Because like say you all got like cash back and you could do it infinitely, you'd just be making money from the cash back.
Oh, okay, so you're saying use a credit card to pay off another card
Yeah,
and
but
you're
like-
doubling your rewards.
Per se, but couldn't a company do that when they also take out lines of credit?
So
from
do you think
different
they get
institutions?
1% cash back on the credit when they borrow money? It's
What,
not
the
like credit
user?
cards.
Oh, yeah, but like for a company's standpoint, wouldn't that increase the operating leverage?
Well, oh yeah,
days
borrowing
to
more
pay
money
back.
is gonna increase the operating leverage, is gonna increase their leverage for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, who would you rather loan money to? Someone that owed a lot of money or someone that didn't owe any money?
Not a lot.
Yeah, you'd rather, and so what you're gonna get yourself into, and that was really when we talked about capital structure in Unit 2, was that, yeah, you can increase your leverage, but at some point, what's it gonna do to the cost of your equity? Your equity cost goes up as your leverage increases because the risk to the equity goes up. And so it's all about finding the optimal. We talked about finding the optimal capital structure. The argument that you're making goes back to about 1958, and then we had to make the correction in 1961, and we say, oh, wait a minute, there have to be limits to this, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if has there ever been like a tier system where you had like 2% in the first 10 days and then you paid off in like 15 days, it's like 1% back, whatever?
You know, I imagine you could do that.
I don't know if it helped out,
You could, yeah. Now, keep in mind that the credit terms are offered by the seller to the buyer. So if the seller wanted to do that, certainly they could. Why would you do something like that? To try to increase your attractiveness, right? And in the end, we're going to see basically what it boils down to is what's it going to do to our profit? If we offer looser terms, will the increase in sales offset the increased cost of doing what we talk about? Okay, any questions? So, the cash flows from granting credit, a lot of people want to assume that as soon as the check is received, that basically that's cash. That's not true. You can't spend that check. What do you have to do with it? You have to deposit it, but even after you deposit, is the money available immediately? No, usually what, the next day before the money is available. And so our accounts receivable period goes all the way from the time of the sale until that cash is available in our checking account. So let's talk about our investment in receivables. So people don't often think about this, but the company truly does have an investment in receivables. Receivables is an asset. We've had to basically have money to be able to offer that credit to these people. And so we're going to figure out, first of all, we're going to say our accounts receivable is equal to our, and it should be average credit sales per day times the average collection period. Our average credit sales per day times our average collection period. Notice that cash sales are included here because cash sales do not end up in accounts receivable. And so the greater our credit sales per day, the greater the accounts receivable, and the longer the collection period, the greater the accounts receivable. Given that we would prefer not to have accounts receivable, remember we said we would prefer not to extend credit if we didn't have to, think about how you'd go about reducing your accounts receivable. Assume that your industry requires you to offer credit. Would you go about it by trying to reduce your credit sales per day? If you are forced to charge credit, to offer credit, 100% of your sales are on credit, right? What would reducing your credit sales per day do to your profits? That's got to decrease them, right? And so then we're looking at the other side of this. The part of this that we would focus on if we were trying to reduce this is focus on that average collection period, which gets right back to what we've been talking about calling people and asking for the payment. So if a firm sells $1,000 a day on credit and collects in an average of 30 days, how much would they have in accounts receivable? Yeah, it's just $30,000, right? It's real easy math. Okay, so we should be monitoring the receivables position. You need to keep an eye on your receivables. And as an investor or a shareholder, you should also be keeping an eye on receivables. What would it mean if the company's receivables were climbing, but their sales were not. Is that good news? No. What if the receivables were growing, sales are going up, but the receivables are growing even faster? What are the managers doing?
Too lax, so.
Yeah, they've made the credit lax in order to increase the sales. Does that make sense? So there was a company, and it's probably still around, called Bausch & Lomb. And you may recognize them from contact lenses and things like that. But they were making these machines for laser eye surgery. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, basically every person that did eye surgery was buying one of these machines. And so Bausch & Lomb didn't have to offer generous credit terms. All they had to do was make sure that this person had good credit, and then they could sell to them, say 30 days terms. Now, what do you think eventually happened to the number of eye doctors left with great credit who did not have a laser eye machine? Yeah, pretty soon that number gets pretty small. But because their sales have been increasing like this, what do you think investors expect? Continued growth. What do you think the managers expect of their underlings? Continued growth. And so what happens is when you force people into a corner like that, they're going to find a way to meet your expectations. And so how did the team at Bausch & Lomb manage to maintain their growth rate for at least a little while longer? They started offering credit to less and less credit-worthy eye surgeons. By the way, physicians are lousy at managing money. I would not loan money to a physician. They're just lousy at managing money. They think they have an infinite amount and that they can spend anything they want and they'll still be in good shape. So, long story short, what do you think happened to their sales? Their sales continued to grow for a while, but what started to happen to their accounts receivable? Starts to grow, and more importantly, the overdue, the people who hadn't paid in a timely manner. And then, of course, it would hurt them if they were to write off those debts. And so what do? Oh, we're going to give them, we'll give them 60 days to pay. They didn't pay in 30, we'll give them 60. That's what we call extend and pretend. We extend the credit terms and pretend that the customer is going to be able to pay. How do you think this story ended? Do you think it ended well? No, eventually it caught up with them and the company went bankrupt. Now, they're probably still around. We know that companies come out of bankruptcy and like a phoenix rising from the ashes, but definitely was not a good plan. What should they have done? They should have been forthcoming with, this is the market. This is why our sales are falling. This is what we can expect going forward. And go ahead and take the hit to the stock price up front. Questions? Okay, so we talked about the second bullet point, and we talked about the third bullet point, and so that was all very conscious decisions on the manager's part. That last one says the deterioration can be unconscious. And I think I told you about a company that I was doing pro bono consulting for. And basically their accounts receivable were swelling. This was during the financial crisis. And it was basically that they weren't paying any attention to it because the customers, they viewed them as their friends. And so basically, if you don't pay attention to the situation, it can easily get out of hand. I'm going to tell you something here important, and I want you to write it down. What gets measured gets managed. What gets measured gets managed. What gets measured gets managed. You could also call it what gets monitored gets managed. This morning I got up and stood on the scale. I try to do that every morning. I was actually down 1.5 pounds today, which I was pleased because I'm kind of up. Now, that's measuring, right? Now, who do you think is more likely to maintain their weight? Someone that weighs every day Someone that weighs once a week or someone that weighs once a month? Yeah, every day. And so if you want to bring managers' attention to something or your employees' attention to something, you've got to measure that and you've got to make that information available to the employees. Otherwise, nobody cares. And that's where you get this unconscious deterioration. Things are getting bad, but maybe people don't even realize it. Now let's talk about days sales outstanding, sometimes called the average collection period. And it's the same as the day sales and receivable. And so we've got this firm with the credit terms, 210, net 30. And 70% of customers take the discount and the rest pay on day 30. What's the firm's days sales outstanding? It's just going to be a weighted average. What do we assume about the customers who take the discount? What day do they pay on? Day 10. So we've got 0.7 times 10 days, and we assume the rest pay on time, 0.3 times 30 days. We add those together, and we have 16 days. And so now we've got, what, we got days and receivables, day sales outstanding, and average collection period. They all mean the same thing. So here we've got our annual sales of $39.6 million. What are the average daily sales? Why do you think we're dividing by 365? Yeah, that's how many days there are in a year. And so that tells us that our average daily sales are $108,493. Now that I have my average daily sales, I can multiply it by my days sales outstanding to come up with what my accounts receivable should be. And so we see it's $1,735,888. Have I blown your mind with any of the math? I mean, this is really simple stuff. So what does day sales outstanding tell us versus other people in the industry? Remember, we can go out there and calculate day sales outstanding, also known as day sales and receivables, for any firm with publicly available financial statements. And so we can go out there and look at our competitors and compare with them. Let's say we've got 16 day sales outstanding and they've got 10 day sales outstanding. Is that good or bad? What would you rather have? Would you rather have more in receivables or less? Yeah, you'd rather have less, right? And so definitely the 10 would be better. What if we're at 16 and the rest of the industry is at 25? We're doing pretty good. Now, what else could that tell us though? Maybe our credit terms are a little tight, and if we loosen them up, what might happen to our sales? Yeah, we might be able to take some business away from our competitors. And we've already talked about reducing day sales outstanding, so I won't hit that one again. Now let's talk about how we monitor, how we measure these things. One of the things we can do is called an aging schedule. And it tells you how much of your accounts receivable is in each of these buckets. And the buckets are like numbers of days, and we'll talk about how we're going to break down those buckets. That first bucket is going to represent the discount days. In our example, we have credit terms of 210 net 30, so that first bucket is 0 to 10 days. The second bucket is going to go from the end of the discount period to the end of the credit terms, which would be days 11 through 30. And then we're going to have 31 through 60, 61 through 90, and so on. And anything after 30 days, of course, would be overdue. Now, if you were trying to look at someone's financial statements and come up with an aging schedule, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. You can only develop an aging schedule for your own firm because you have this information and outsiders do not. Now, we can find their day sales outstanding. We could do that, but we cannot figure out an aging schedule for them. So here's what an aging schedule looks like. And we've got two firms here. Both have accounts receivable of $1,735,888. We've got Supersets and Wonder Vision. And Supersets, everyone is either taking the discount or paying within the terms. However, on the other hand, Wonder Vision looks like they're doing a lousy job of managing their receivables. They've got 260,000 that are overdue at least 15 days. They've got 174,000 that are overdue in that next 15 days. And then they've got 34,000 that's been outstanding over 60 days. By the way, the probability of getting paid, the further out in time, the greater or lesser probability you're going to get paid. Yeah, lesser probability, and eventually you're just going to have to write those off, right? Okay, so that's what an aging schedule looks like. So now we're going to talk about analyzing proposed changes to our credit policy. The only reason that we would ease our credit policy is to increase our sales. That's the positive side. But with that, we're going to also see some negatives. So first of all, our costs are going to rise, and that's just due to the increase in sales. So remember that each one of these items that we're selling has a variable cost associated with it. And so it makes perfect sense that if we're selling more of these units, we're going to have higher costs. That's something that I'm perfectly willing to accept in exchange for increased sales. By the way, do our fixed costs also go up? No, they're fixed, right? And so I'm perfectly willing to make that exchange. The accounts receivable is going to increase due to increased sales. Once again, I'm perfectly willing to do that. But they may also, if we extend our credit terms, our accounts receivable are going to extend as a result of doing that. And that's going to increase our costs. In fact, both of these things, we'll see that we have an increased cost of carrying accounts receivable. And our bad debts can rise if we are granting credit to less credit-worthy people. This is what happened to Bausch & Lomb. When they eased their credit, they started having more bad debts. And then if we raise that discount expense from, say, 2% to 3%, we are going to be increasing that expense by 50%. Or if we offer that discount period for longer, that's also going to increase our expense. So here's our example firm. We are relaxing our credit standards. We're changing from 110 net 30 to 210 net 40. What are the two changes?
Discount percent and the net period.
Yeah, the discount percent and the overall credit period. And so do you think more people will be taking the discount now? Yeah, so more people are going to be paying within 10 days, but if they don't pay within 10 days, they used to would have paid in 30 days, and now when are they going to pay? Day 40. So our current day sales outstanding is 0.5 times 10 plus 0.4 times, so basically 50% are taking the discount, 40% are paying on time, and 10% are paying within 40 days. And so our current days sales outstanding is just the weighted average of those, which gives us 21 days. And our discounts. We are selling half of our stuff on discount, and we're selling $400 million a year. 400 million times 0.5 is 200 million times the 1% discount is $2 million a year. So that's what we're spending on these discounts. It's $2 million a year. And then we have our accounts receivable carrying cost. It costs us money to have these accounts receivable. But let's talk about what we truly have invested in them. Remember that accounts receivable is at your sales price. Is that truly the money we have invested in them? No. If I'm spending $10 to put something on the shelf and then I sell it for $12, what do I really have in it? I've got $10 in it. And more than that, that $10 contains both variable costs and fixed costs. And what you need to understand here is that, as always in finance, when we're making a decision, we want to use incremental costs. And so the incremental change in our accounts receivable carrying cost is not going to be impacted by the fixed cost because it's going to be the same before and after. And so actually all that matters to us is the variable cost that it took for us to put that stuff on the shelf that we then turned around and sold. And so we're going to come up with something called the variable cost ratio. And that's where I take the variable cost of the item, the unit variable cost, and divide by the price. If I take the unit variable cost, divide by the price, that gives me the variable cost proportion. And so our accounts receiving cost, carrying cost is going to be the accounts receiving multiplied by the variable cost ratio, which is just the unit variable cost divided by the price, and then multiply by the cost of the money to carry receivables. Maybe we have a credit line from the bank that we're using to go in and offer this. Maybe that's 5%, who knows? They're telling us here that our VC ratio is 0.7. What does that mean? It means if I'm selling these things for $10 a piece, what is my variable cost per unit? Yeah, it's got to be 7, right? And they're telling us the cost of funds here is 20%. They're obviously not just using a line of credit from their bank, or it would be less. Okay, so we've got our accounts receivable carrying cost is going to be, accounts receivable, which is the number of days sales in outstanding multiplied by the average daily credit sales. So that's what that 21 times 400 million over 365 is all about. Multiplied by the variable cost ratio, multiplied by the cost of the funds, it comes up to about $3 million per year that we are spending to carry that accounts receivable. And I've already answered that last question. The fixed cost is the same before and after whatever change we're talking about, and so it's not incremental, so we're not going to consider it. Currently, 2.5% of our sales go uncollected. We have 400 million in sales, 2.5%. 400 million is 10 million bucks. So we've got the new credit policy. Let's see. So what impact is this going to have? First of all, we've got the larger discount. And we've got the longer payment period, so we know we're going to have additional accounts receivable there. Let's see, relaxed collection effort and lower credit standards. What are relaxed collection efforts going to do to the bad debt? That's got to push it up. And the same with relaxing our credit standards. Why in the world would we do this to ourselves? Well, they're estimating that the sales are going to increase by 130 million bucks. Now, I want to point something out here. All the stuff we've talked to right up to the 130 million bucks are known numbers, right? What are all the things that we're doing beyond that? When we look at the new situation, they're all swags, they're all guesses, right? Is there risk in doing these things? Yeah, very much so. And I think you now have enough to be able to do the homework. So go ahead and do the homework. We'll start here next time, and then we'll jump into inventory.